It was New Year's Eve in the small town of Eldridge, and the air was filled with an eerie anticipation. The town's clock tower, a Gothic structure that had stood for centuries, loomed ominously against the midnight sky. Legend had it that the clock tower was haunted, and that on New Year's Eve, the spirits of those who had died there roamed the streets. The townspeople avoided the tower, especially on this fateful night, but Marissa, a local journalist, was determined to uncover the truth. Marissa decided to spend the night in the clock tower to investigate the rumors. Armed with her camera and a flashlight, she ascended the spiral staircase, each step echoing through the empty hall. The air grew colder the higher she climbed, and an unsettling silence enveloped her. As she reached the top, the clock struck 11, and the chimes reverberated through her bones, sending chills down her spine. She set up her equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. As the minutes ticked by, the temperature dropped even further, and Marissa could see her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Suddenly, she heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Leave this place," it said. The voice seemed to come from the shadows, and Marissa's heart began to race. Marissa spun around, but there was no one there. The clock tower was silent except for the ticking of the giant clock. She shrugged it off, attributing it to her imagination. But then she saw it, a shadowy figure standing by the clock's mechanism, staring at her with hollow eyes. The figure was tall and thin, its face obscured by darkness, but its presence was undeniably malevolent. Terrified, she snapped a photo, but when she checked her camera, the figure was gone. Heart-pounding, she decided to leave. As she descended the staircase, she felt a cold hand grip her shoulder. She screamed and ran, but the hand tightened, pulling her back. Marissa's flashlight flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. She tripped and fell, hitting her head on the stone floor. Dazed, she looked up to see a ghostly face inches from her own. "You should have listened," it whispered. The face was gaunt and pale, with eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. Marissa scrambled to her feet and fled, not stopping until she was outside the tower. Breathless and shaken, she glanced back at the clock tower. The shadowy figure stood at the top, watching her. She knew she couldn't stay in Eldridge any longer. She left town the next day, vowing never to return. But the memory of that night haunted her, and she often woke from nightmares of the ghostly figure. Years later, the clock tower was demolished, but the ghost stories persisted. Marissa's experience became a cautionary tale, warning others to heed the warnings of the past. The clock tower may be gone, but the spirits that haunted it remain, forever tied to the town and its dark history. Visitors to Eldridge still claim to see shadowy figures at night, and the air is always colder near the site where the clock tower once stood. Marissa never found peace. She moved far away, but on every New Year's Eve, she would hear the distant chimes of a clock and feel a cold hand on her shoulder. The ghost had marked her, and she realized that some spirits never let go. Eldridge remained a place of mystery and fear, its haunted history a permanent scar on the town's soul. In the heart of New Orleans, an old mansion stood abandoned for decades. It was said that on New Year's Eve, the spirits of a tragic party would reenact their final moments. Intrigued by the tale, a group of friends decided to spend the night there, hoping to witness the ghostly event. Alex, Jenna, Mike, and Lisa arrived at the mansion just before midnight, their excitement mingled with apprehension. The mansion, known as Beaumont House, was a sprawling estate with a dark history. It had been the site of a grand New Year's Eve party in the 1920s, which ended in disaster when a fire broke out, killing dozens of guests. The house was never restored, and it stood as a decaying monument to the tragedy. The friends brought candles, flashlights, and a Ouija board, ready to summon the spirits. As they entered the grand foyer, the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. The mansion was eerily quiet, its grand halls echoing with the footsteps of the past. The friends could feel the weight of history pressing down on them as they made their way to the ballroom where the infamous party had taken place. The room was filled with decaying furniture and cobwebs, but the chandelier above remained pristine, glistening as if frozen in time. They set up in the ballroom, lighting the candles and arranging the Ouija board on an old, dust-covered table. The atmosphere was tense as they began the seance, hoping to contact the spirits of the ill-fated guests. As the clock struck midnight, the air seemed to shimmer and the room filled with the sound of music. The friends watched in awe as ghostly figures appeared, dancing and laughing as if they were alive. But the joy quickly turned to horror as the guests' faces contorted in fear. One by one, the spirits began to relive their deaths. Jenna screamed as she saw a woman clutch her throat, gasping for air. Alex tried to comfort her, but his eyes were fixed on a man writhing in agony, blood pouring from an invisible wound. The friends were paralyzed with fear, unable to look away from the gruesome spectacle. The ballroom grew colder, and the spirits turned their gaze towards the friends. "Why are you here?" a ghostly voice demanded. Mike tried to speak, but no sound came out. The spirits advanced, their eyes burning with anger. "Leave us!" they cried, their voices blending into a cacophony of torment. Lisa grabbed the Ouija board, hoping to end the seance, but it was too late. The spirits swirled around them, their icy hands reaching out. Alex felt a cold grip around his neck and struggled to breathe. Jenna collapsed, her body convulsing as if she were being possessed. The room seemed to close in on them, the walls pulsing with a malevolent energy. Mike and Lisa, in a desperate bid for survival, dragged their friends out of the ballroom, stumbling over debris and broken furniture. The ghostly figures followed, their faces twisted with rage. Just as they reached the front door, the spirits vanished, leaving the friends gasping for air on the porch. They never spoke of that night again, but the memory haunted them. Every New Year's Eve, they would feel a chill and hear the faint sound of music, reminding them of the night they disturbed the phantom party. The mansion remains abandoned, a silent witness to the horrors within. Locals claim to hear ghostly laughter and see flickering lights in the windows on New Year's Eve. The friends moved on with their lives, but the experience left a permanent scar. Lisa, who had always been a skeptic, became obsessed with the paranormal, seeking answers in the supernatural. Alex suffered from nightmares and anxiety, often waking in a cold sweat, convinced he could feel the ghostly grip on his neck. Jenna turned to religion, hoping to find solace and protection from the spirits that haunted her dreams. Mike, once the leader of their adventures, became reclusive, avoiding anything that reminded him of that fateful night. Years passed, but the memory of Beaumont House never faded. The friends drifted apart, each haunted by their own demons. The mansion stood as a grim reminder of the tragedy and the night they dared to confront the unknown. New Orleans, with its rich history and haunted past, remained a city of mystery, its dark secrets waiting to be uncovered. In a secluded cabin by Midnight Lake, the Harrison family gathered to celebrate New Year's Eve. The lake was rumored to be haunted by the spirit of a woman who had drowned there years ago. Undeterred by the stories, they planned a night of festivities and fireworks. The cabin was nestled in a dense forest, far from civilization, adding to the sense of isolation and suspense. As the clock neared midnight, the family gathered on the dock, watching the moonlight dance on the water's surface. The air was still, and a dense fog began to roll in, shrouding the lake in an ethereal mist. The children, Sarah and Jake, were excited about the fireworks, unaware of the danger lurking beneath the calm waters. David and Laura, their parents, tried to ignore the eerie feeling creeping over them. Their parents, David and Laura, lit the first firework, and the sky exploded in a burst of color. The children cheered, but their joy was short-lived. From the depths of the lake, a mournful wail echoed, chilling them to the bone. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Laura tried to reassure her, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her calm words. Before David could answer, a ghostly figure emerged from the fog, gliding across the water towards them. The spirit of the drowned woman, her eyes hollow and her hair streaming like seaweed, reached out with skeletal hands. "Help me," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. The family backed away in terror, but the spirit continued to advance. Laura grabbed the children and ran towards the cabin, while David stood his ground, trying to protect his family. "Leave us alone," he shouted, but the ghost's eyes bore into his soul, filling him with an overwhelming sense of despair. The spirit's presence was suffocating, and David felt an icy chill envelop him. He knew he had to do something to save his family. As Laura and the children reached the safety of the cabin, the lights flickered and went out. The temperature dropped, and a cold wind howled through the trees. Laura frantically searched for a flashlight, but the batteries were dead. She huddled with the children, praying for David's safe return. The cabin creaked and groaned, as if the very walls were alive with fear. Outside, the spirit circled David, her presence suffocating him with a palpable dread. "I just want to be free," she cried, her voice echoing through the night. David realized that the only way to save his family was to confront the ghost. "How can we help you?" he asked, his voice shaking. The spirit paused, her eyes filled with a longing that transcended death. "My body lies at the bottom of the lake. Bring it to the surface, and I will find peace." David knew it was a perilous task, but he had no choice. He ran to the shed and grabbed a rope and a flashlight. He returned to the dock and dived into the freezing water, the cold searing his lungs. Guided by the ghostly figure, he swam deeper into the lake, his flashlight cutting through the murky depths. Finally, he saw it, a skeletal hand protruding from the silt, clutching a piece of jewelry. David tied the rope around the bones and surfaced, gasping for air. He pulled the body to shore, his muscles aching with the effort. As he laid the remains on the dock, the spirit appeared beside him, her expression one of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, and slowly faded away. David returned to the cabin, exhausted but relieved. The lights flickered back on, and the temperature returned to normal. The family embraced, thankful to be alive. They left the cabin the next day, vowing never to return to Midnight Lake. The ghost had found peace, but the memory of that night would haunt them forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. Despite their resolution to move on, the Harrison family couldn't escape the trauma. Sarah and Jake had nightmares of the ghostly figure, and Laura became overly protective, fearing another encounter with the supernatural. David, haunted by the woman's sorrowful eyes, often found himself staring at the lake, lost in thought. Years later, they learned that the spirit was a woman named Eliza, who had drowned trying to save her child. The child's body was never found, and Eliza's spirit remained tethered to the lake, searching for her lost child. The Harrisons held a small memorial for Eliza, hoping to bring closure to her tragic story. But the lake held more secrets. On stormy nights, the fog would roll in, and locals would hear the faint wail of a mother searching for her child. The legend of Midnight Lake grew, drawing curious visitors and ghost hunters. The Harrisons moved away, but the shadow of that New Year's Eve night followed them. David never spoke of his dive into the lake, but the memory was etched into his mind. He could still feel the icy water and see the skeletal hand reaching out. Midnight Lake became a place of legend, a haunted spot that kept its secrets close. The ghost of Eliza may have found some peace, but her story left an indelible mark on all who heard it.